I want to welcome everybody this evening. I am Cindy Lott. I'm a professor in the Nonprofit Management Master's Degree Program at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. I'm also the academic director, and I work in the field of policy and charitable regulation. And I am so glad that you are here to join us tonight on what is our finale to our Election 2020 Policy and Advocacy Series. We have an amazing evening ahead. I want to contextualize just a bit for this evening about what this particular session is going to be on with these very expert panelists that we have this evening. We'll be meeting until 7:30 p.m. Eastern time tonight. And in that time, we're going to be talking about a lot of different types of issues. This series was born around 2 years ago, and actually tonight's date was chosen 2 years ago, knowing that we would be several weeks out of the inauguration. And who could have known what an election cycle this would be for so many reasons. We also are including this as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion series. Obviously, these issues are top of mind always, and in particular, as of last summer, we've had a lot more organizing and thinking about the role of the nonprofit sector within equity considerations. So we've had several of our panels address those issues, and we want to make sure that you know that this is just the finale of 6 different sessions, all of which are recorded and are on our website. You will find our website link to tonight's event in the chat box. And you will also be able to find a link to our entire website in case you're interested in the program or what else it is that we do. We put on a lot of different events. This workshop was born of a need to really address how we think about nonprofit policy and advocacy in real time through an election cycle. We know that people work in the space. We know that there's often even misinformation about what nonprofits are allowed to do legally and how they function in the policy and advocacy space. But as an educator, apart from someone who has actually also worked within our sector and the others as well, and within government for sure, it's a little unclear about how we actually engage at times. And throughout this series, we deliberately picked different junctures within an election cycle that frankly are evergreen. They weren't just on substantive issues raised by this election cycle, although we address those as well, but we address specific junctures where there are specific challenges or considerations that we as a policy and advocacy community within the nonprofit sector should be thinking about in terms of how we address those junctures. And you see that in the 6 different panels that we've created. And again, all available to you with materials and resources. So it is evergreen. We also address the census, which only comes around every so often, but it coincided this year with this election cycle. So we had an entire panel on that as well. I would urge you to look at those series, because that series and all of the workshops in it, because here we are, we've already started the next cycle. And that is true for both federal and state. So tonight, when we talk about the path ahead, I will tell you that our last November workshop was looking at what just happened in the election, which at that time, we knew an answer, but there was still tumult around it. This time, we really are looking at the path ahead. And we have an incredible array of expertise. I can't even think about how many years of experience we have on this Zoom tonight. With our panel. And so with that, I want to introduce our esteemed panel. You will find all of their bios. Again, they're all esteemed. They all have very long histories in our sector and in other work. And their bios are in our website. Again, you can find in the chat. But I want to introduce first Janine Lee. We also have Jen Masaoka, Neil Denton, and a special thanks to Sue Santa and Sandra Swirsky, who have been co-developers of this series of workshops throughout the entire time, and they've been amazing colleagues. We've heard them as moderators throughout this series, Sue and Sandra, but we have not been able to hear quite as much the deep dive of their expertise, and that's why tonight I'm moderating this one so that we can also shine a light on what Sue and Sandra bring to the table as well. So we've got 5 panelists and we've got lots of questions. We've got a lot to cover. So I just want you to know we will zip through, but the panelists know that they can speak to each other's points, etc. And we're going to get started right away. If you have a question, audience, that you would like to ask, you need to put it into the question area so that we can see if with the time that we have at the end, if we can address as many of those as possible that are relevant for tonight's discussion. So with that, I want to start off with Janine, but we're going to ask the same question of everybody. With all that has gone on with this election cycle, all the tumult, all of the angst that we have gone through, lots and lots of different issues that have come to the fore, I'd like to ask that even after all of your years of experience, all of you, what is something that you learned that was new to you, that you will carry forward, that you'll have to be thinking about in this next cycle and beyond? Janine? Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the invitation. So pleased to be here. I want to just start out by setting a little context about kind of my experience and the perspective that I'm bringing. I am, as serving obviously as president of the Southeastern Council of Foundations, and so my work really spans across an 11-state footprint of the Southeastern United States. And I work predominantly at this point in my career for the last decade with foundations and philanthropy, but I have a 30-year history in the nonprofit sector and philanthropy. So prior to philanthropy, I was definitely working within the nonprofit sector. And I see that as that relationship as having an inextricable link, both philanthropy and public charity. So I just wanted to set that context. But in answer to the question, I think, Cindy, certainly for me, I have come to realize, I think we have come to realize at the Southeastern Council just how deeply we are all impacted by the issues, the multiplicity of issues and crises that we find ourselves in America today, and certainly within the Southeastern region. So I'm just going to name a few, certainly growing inequality, the erosion of democracy and trust within our sector, rising environmental concerns, and certainly domestic extremism, just to name a few. But these issues really have been exacerbated by COVID, by COVID-19 and the pandemic. And in truth, it has just kind of laid bare for all of us and affected so many issues in different ways and at varying degrees. So when you think about that, and you think about the region that we serve and the philanthropic leaders that we support, SECF, we've really been traditionally engaged in policy work that's been focused on promotion and defense. Our organization is today 51 years old. And so for the last 50 years, let's say, that has been our focus. And so that has taken really the form of really, commenting on tax proposals, advocating for charitable giving incentives, sharing data on foundation giving. And I think what we're seeing more clearly now is that we can't continue to, in essence, isolate ourselves in policy that's just focused on philanthropy. And in similar ways, our members cannot continue to restrict themselves to just focused on grant making. And the reason I say that is we feel that we need to have an active voice in promoting the kind of work and the kind of policies that create equitable outcomes. Our members are calling for that. Given that we are in the South, that is our space, our members are very, very place-based. And the donors that gave to these foundations really wanted them to create change in terms of the conditions of the South and on behalf of children, youth, and families in the South. And so in order to get to those outcomes, which we kind of call our South Star, we really feel strongly that moving forward, it's important that we not restrict ourselves just to promotion and defense, but we begin really thinking more deeply about issue-based public policy that can help move the needle around improving those conditions, improving the life chances on behalf of children, youth, and families and communities all across the South. And the U.S. Virgin Islands that we serve. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
I like it, the South Star. I appreciate that. In 51 years, that's not nothing, that's for sure. So, and in a very energized 51 years at that, particularly in the geography. So multiplicity, that's a huge one. And you don't get to silo, right? You're going to have to step out of some comfort zones, it sounds like, as a new place for you all. Jan from California.
Thanks, Cindy. I do have to say, you have to stop emphasizing how much experience we have. I mean, only some of us are in our 90s, you know, so made us all feel old. So thanks very much for asking me to be here. I think, you know, one of the things that, I mean, mostly the election showed us a lot of things that are always true, like money matters. Who the candidate is matters, not just policy. Race matters in every election. But in this particular time, I thought that the role of misinformation was particularly strong. And I think that, you know, we've said for years that, you know, communities need to create their own media as opposed to trying to break into mainstream media. And I think what we saw is that we haven't been very good at that. We definitely have some bright spots, but we are not creating the kind of media communities that I think we need to have. You asked, like, what's our perspective? I'm the head of a California Association of Nonprofits. We say Cal Nonprofits for short. We're a 10,000 member alliance of nonprofits in California. You know, remember us, the state with more COVID cases than anybody else. And our focus is on policy. But I think in terms of my perspective, the most important thing to know about that is that I'm extremely grumpy and pessimistic and skeptical. So that's kind of the perspective I hope to bring here. I think one of the things that was different was it seemed much more connected to me this election to the global political winds. You know, and I think that what we are in right now is, of course, a global health crisis, right? And out of that, a global economic crisis, and also an overall a swing in large countries, high population countries, to kind of authoritarian, right-leaning administrations. And so I think seeing the US election was more clear in that international context. It helps us remember that some things are really not about what's happening here, but they're about forces that are much greater than us. But just, so one last thing, I think I don't know if this is the same thing that happens every time, but there's always something really unexpected about the voting patterns. And for example, that, you know, on any side, whichever side you're on, it doesn't come out the way you thought it was going to come out. And I think particularly for those of us kind of left of center, I think that one of the things that was very big surprise was that a higher percentage of Latinos voted for Trump this time than in the first election. And that goes against kind of the liberal assumption that people of color, particularly, you know, Latinos around immigration issues, for example, you know, are going to vote Democrat. And yet I think we have these very unexpected wake-up calls in elections, and yet then we doesn't really tend to change our assumptions. So I think that's something we really need to think about doing, is listening harder and being willing to challenge those assumptions about, you know, 45% in the first Trump election, 45% of college-educated white women voted for Trump. Now, especially when the other candidate was a woman, that was extremely unexpected, I think, for a lot of people. And so I think, but this time, let's try to learn from it.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot to learn there. So many new unexpected things for people that haven't been in policy a long time, but it's remarkable when it's someone who has had, you know, all of you decades of experience, and that doesn't make you old, Jan, it just makes you wizened. We appreciate that. Neil, what's been new despite it all? Thanks for joining us.
Cindy, thank you for including me. You know, what's going to be tough about this, I feel like I'm taking notes while I'm sort of helping to think about what it is that I want to talk about. What a tremendous panel. And as someone was teasing earlier, some of this very same group, we've been getting together on regular calls throughout the last several months, helping sort of shape strategy for what it is we're doing with the new administration and up on Capitol Hill. So it's good to see everybody in this kind of a setting too. What's new? I got to tell you, old dog, right? Lots of new tricks that we're learning this year. We had just before all hell broke loose in March, we had our Capitol Hill Day in Washington, D.C., where we had 300 folks, 50 youth delegates. And we did the old fashioned go up to the congressional offices, go up and visit the senator and have the right talking points. And that's how you share your point of view and you educate lawmakers. And what was new this year is when that was over, we had to figure out how to do it all virtually. And for an awful lot of our folks, and I'm not the only old dog in my organization. We all had to learn new tricks, and headlining wasn't just us. I still do Zoom calls with members of Congress or staffers where it's clear the member of Congress is uncomfortable with using Zoom or any of that. I was talking to a member of Congress the other day, and the whole time he's talking to me like this. I'm thinking, good heavens, it's February. By now, someone should have taught you how to communicate on a Zoom call. So new tools, right? Doing virtual town halls, virtual one-on-one meetings, virtual fundraisers, and there's an interesting twist. You know, most fundraisers, the reason you're engaging at all is that you get FaceTime one-on-one with whomever the elected official are, and but you don't have that now. What's going to be curious is of all these new tools, which ones we keep when this is over, and which ones we just can't wait to jettison. But there's going to be an awful lot of new tools here that help us do better. We have an awful lot of engaging young folks who are part of our organization, who just tell the most powerful stories of what it is that we can do. And we haven't been able to include enough young folks in a lot of our work because it's expensive to have people come to DC and participate in this. But this virtual environment, I have been so impressed when we engage our young folks because they are comfortable in this new virtual environment, and they tell such powerful stories, and there are more of them there. And the last thing I'll throw on there is the new thing that I just really gained a greater appreciation for is the partnerships. We spend an awful lot of time talking about our own sets of issues up on Capitol Hill, and throughout this year, the nonprofit sector was speaking more as one on a lot of these issues, and that was new. And it might be, I think, if there was one good, bright, shining thing that came out of this, it was that the sector was working closer together than we ever had before.
Still a ways to go, I would suggest, but partly why we do this series, right? So thank you for that. Yeah, and I mean, the Zoom environment has certainly helped get into the interstices of the rest of the country that isn't going to go, take the bus or the plane to DC. So even for Hill Day. So I appreciate that. Sandra, next. So glad to see you here. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. It's fun being on this side. Opposed to your side. I'm going to pick up on something that that Neil mentioned, which was the collaboration that many of us in the sector have had for so long. And we're not doing it in person, but we're doing it over Zoom. And what is a hallmark of this sector's work in the policy space is that we do challenge each other. Is we each come in with our own ideas on how to make the world a better place. And we do challenge each other because we're because we're close colleagues. And I think in thinking through your question about what did I learn after going through this election cycle? And I'm going to be a little grumpy, Jan. I'm going to give you a run for your money. In a nutshell, what I learned is I think there are too many lazy thinkers in our midst. Not this panel, not the audience, probably not in the sector, but people have their favorite news and opinion sources. We all do, but fewer of us are truly open to having our perspective, our truth challenged. Having your perspective challenged in a constructive way can be terrifically eye-opening. You know, if you have children or remember being about 5 years old, you'll remember how curious they are, not resigned to accepting anything at face value, but rather the endless, well, why is that? How come that? Why? As adults, we really don't pry as much, and I really think we should. We're going to heal quicker as a nation and come together sooner as Americans if we respectfully pry more often, not just about someone else's opinion, but allowing them to query ours as well.
I appreciate that.
Can I disagree with her?
That. Please, Jan. Go right ahead.
I take issue with the idea that that other people are lazy thinkers, or that we're all lazy thinkers. I think that actually we are in a cultural and identity war. And I think that what's happening is in anything like that, I think the extremes are going further and further out. But I don't think that framing it as lazy thinking versus, I mean, I think this is one of the things I love about elections. I go door to door, except for this election. I've gone door to door in every election for decades, as Cindy says, for decades. And I think because, you know, most of us haven't heard from our average voter or someone who disagrees with us, you know, and I think one of the big divides of the nonprofit sector is between kind of the nonprofit intelligentsia and the infrastructure organizations and philanthropy and the people that are in direct services. And I think that, so I just think, you know, if we want to start by getting out of our own zones, one of the things we can do is simply visit a different part of the nonprofit community.
Well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let me push back a little bit. I think part of visiting a different part of the nonprofit community is being open to hearing how they do things, why they do things, why they think the way they do, which could challenge our own assumptions. And that's good. More people need to do that. And by lazy thinkers, I mean the people who don't go out and do that on a regular basis and are doing the same thing they've always done, or because that's what they're hearing and that's what they're thinking, and they're not open to necessarily hearing anything different. And I think that if we spend more time reaching across, reaching out, meeting and greeting, we are naturally going to be taking into consideration other people's perspectives. And that's really what this is all about. It's getting out of our own bubble that we have created for ourselves.
So let's put a pin in that for a moment, because after we get through the first round, I want to talk about and think in your mind some of the suggestions that we can take from the things that we're about to discuss, right? From the topics of the new and the true, if you will, which would have been a good name for this panel. Let's talk about suggestions in a moment. Thank you for that. I want to go to Sue. Something new in all your years you had not seen, but you better remember it for the next round.
Thanks, Cindy, and I agree with Sandra. Great to be on this side of the questions this time around. So, just by way of background for everybody who's viewing, I have many years of experience in the for-profit sector. You can see that in my bio. And then I came into the nonprofit sector. So I've seen this from a number of different sides. What is new to this election cycle is this is the first time I've actually worked for a youth organization. I am the Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy for Girl Scouts of the USA. So what I learned picks up on something that Neil talked about, which is really the energy and passion of young people, and something that I really kind of witnessed closely and for the first time. And you know, my organization has a commitment to building girls of courage, confidence, and character, as we say. And so I really saw it as my responsibility to figure out how to channel this energy toward meaningful experiences so that girls and young women understand they can make a difference, and their voice is important and they need to be heard. So that was something really new for me. I worked with colleagues to develop strategies and activities that really effectively put girls in the election process, trying to prod the adults in their worlds to vote. And we also got girls in front of many lawmakers to share their views. And it was really a great experience for me to see and for me to start to think through how we use that effectively over time. Now, my organization serves every zip code in the country and beyond. We do have an international presence. And so that means we have a very broad and diverse membership. So the other thing that is very critical to consider when you're in an organization like mine, and probably Neil very much the same way, is we really have to think of how we help our young people be energized and activated in a way that kind of transcends politics. And so that's something that we work through. So now the second, what I learned point, I want to shift gears to focus more broadly on the nonprofit sector. And really here, this is something that I kind of knew, and now it became clearer. And as we went through our COVID relief work, which we had 8 months of the election cycle to work through that, then we were in a very tumultuous transition. Now we're in a new administration. And what I am really convinced of is that the charitable nonprofit sector has really not developed an effective and compelling narrative that defines the role it plays in the economy and in society. We really need to define ourselves in a way that conveys this role the nonprofit sector plays within this much bigger ecosystem that includes for-profits, other types of nonprofits, and the government. And while we use data and have data such as the percentage of people we employ, we proudly say we're 10% of the workforce, and some other points, it just doesn't seem to convey the full story. It doesn't really convey what our country and our communities would be without nonprofits. Our lawmakers, by and large, don't understand the complexities of the sector, the interconnectedness to our economic well-being, and the indispensable role that is played in keeping virtually every community operating. Now, why is this so important? Well, we saw it front and center in COVID. We continue to struggle to get the attention of lawmakers to create COVID relief measures that are fully and fairly supporting nonprofits. So rather, this position we find ourselves in is that we're just trying to scramble and make sure that business programs also kind of include us on the side, which is a very, very imperfect resolution. So in terms of the lessons learned, I think this is really a space where more effort and more investment are needed. So I'll turn back to you, Cindy.
Thank you very much, Sue. Really great points, all of these. And I would just say that I really agree with this. I think it's one of the reasons why we teach policy. Sue's one of our professors for that class in our program. And we think about and try to train students to think about how even their own lives and communities have been impacted by nonprofits for this very reason. It's a really baseline consideration of when in your life, we actually have an exercise, their first class. What's your autobiographical situation with your philanthropic autobiography? And we ask them to really think deeply about how they in their own lives have been connected to this world. And it's a good starting point for a narrative. We know a lot of policymakers, I often say it's easier to teach someone who doesn't know anything, tabula rasa moment, than someone who thinks they know. And part of the problem is they think they know often, right? And so you're starting from a preconception that you may or may not even realize when you go up to the Hill, Neil, or whether it's on Zoom or in person this next year. So agreed with that. And I also would be curious, if you all agree or not in your next round of answers to some of this, I don't think we do a great job either. To your point, Sue, I think if we cannot figure out in a recession, in COVID, with all of the racial equity considerations that we have right now, if we can't figure it out now, if not now, when? At what point do we get to say enough already, right? I think there's just so much more work that needs to be done here in raising up people that really do understand what they're going to be advocating for. And that's one of my other questions for you as we move through this tonight, the difference between policy and working in advocacy. And I've actually heard those distinctions even in your answers tonight. Those can be very different after this particular election cycle as well, right? So I appreciate that. Any and all of these topics get to be raised as you move through your next set of answers or as we discuss with each other. So I appreciate all of those answers. Let's move on to a next point that I've asked you all to consider, as I said, of the new and the true. After this, again, tumultuous election cycle, after all we have seen, what we have learned, what's new, what our communities have been put through at times, and sometimes, you know, out there, we are learning a lot about our communities that we may have even thought that we knew pretty well, right? What remains true, even through this all, that we need to be keeping in mind as we move forward now, despite all that may seem new? What's the kernel at the core? I'm going to start with Janine on this.
Thank you, Cindy. And I appreciate the healthy debate that my colleagues were having earlier. And I'd love to touch on a couple of those points, maybe at the close of my comments here. But I think one of the things that remains true, I'm going to use two words: relationships matter. And they always have, and they always will. And particularly when we're talking about public policy and advocacy, which in my opinion are a part of a long game and can't be fully embraced without those relationships being in place. So it does seem to me that having the kind of contacts and relationships, whether it be with staffers or agency heads or policymakers, legislators, it's so important. And one of the things that we have worked really hard with our members to do is to really build those relationships and to not be intimidated to build those relationships. Just as an example, we survey our members every year. And one of the things that we've learned from surveying our members is that there's only a very small percentage, somewhere in the 4 to 5% range that we survey. And we always have a very healthy rate of return on our surveys from members. But only 4 to 5% of them say that they feel that they are expert, if you will, in the public policy and advocacy space. What we're trying to get across to them is you don't have to be an expert. We can help support you with information and knowledge and resources. You have the expertise in terms of understanding your community, understanding the issues and needs of those communities. And you're the best folks as the constituents of these policymakers to communicate on behalf of those communities. And so we take our members every year to something called Foundations on the Hill, for example. And we, from the Southeastern region, bring the largest delegation of foundations each year to the Hill. This year, fortunately and unfortunately, it will be virtual. But a big part of going to the Hill and meeting with all of these policymakers and other leaders is being able to first get in the door, to be able to set up those meetings and those calls and those visits. And it really helps to have a relationship. And so that I just wanted to say that because we track policy actions throughout the year, we update our members on relevant legislation, we host programming, we support our members with ongoing engagement with legislators, but they bring the experience and the knowledge from their community, which is really what they want to hear about. So relationships matter. I did want to just follow up real quickly, if I could, Cindy, a couple of things I heard my colleagues say. And, you know, this debate about kind of the laziness of thinking. Well, my perspective is even beyond that, I feel like we're losing our humanity. And a big part of what seems to be happening now in our environment all over the country is that people are being hated because of their ideology. They're hated because of their points of view. And it's actually becoming dangerous to express a point of view. And so I think that's an important part of this discussion as well. And then finally, in terms of the kind of compelling narrative that nonprofits could possibly bring forward. I would add to that, many years ago when I first started my career at the Kauffman Foundation, one of the leaders who was a key advisor to Mr. Kauffman was Dr. John W. Gardner, who passed in 2002. And Dr. Gardner was one of the co-founders of the independent sector. And when I think about all of the work that he did to champion the sector, to help people really understand and appreciate the value of the sector, then it occurs to me that we need more leaders, and we've got them in our sector. We need more leaders to come forward and be champions and visible and bring voice in much the way that Dr. Gardner and many others have done before. Thank you.
And certainly some of the associations have tried very, very hard to work on these issues over time. When I suggest that what we're doing isn't enough, I still think it isn't enough, right? But it doesn't mean we're not attempting it. I just think this time around, to piggyback on what you're saying, we have some ideals from the start. We have to adjust to the new realities that are out there, both on the policy side and the advocacy side. And again, the distinction is there. You all know that well. Let's move on to Jan. I'm sure you have thoughts on this too. What has remained true? And you mentioned at least one of those things in your opening remark.
Janine is always so inspiring. I mean, I'm just thinking like what a better human being she is. Like, I mean, like I hate people. I hate Trump. I hate some other people, and I mean, really hate them. So anyway, she's an inspiration. Well, some of the people in my family are farmers. And one of the things farmers are always saying is, if only people understood farmers, if only they understood how important we are to the economy, to feeding people, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? We're never going to understand farmers, and other people aren't going to understand nonprofits. That's just our society today. And I think that even if we all did understand farmers, I don't think we'd still be willing to pay 3 times as much for tomatoes. All right, and let me tell you another story, which is about going with a bunch of nonprofit folks to visit the then mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown. And this group of nonprofits, and he was pretty friendly to nonprofits. They had all this data showing all the stuff that everybody does, all this, evaluation. And at the end of it, he said, okay, how many votes do you control? So I really agree with Janine that relationships matter, but you know what? Money usually trumps relationships. We can have a great relationship with the state senator, but if there's a wealthy company or a wealthy individual in that community, they're going to swing that vote. So what we have to do to be able to counter that, we can have relationships. We don't have the money, but we have to have the votes. And I think one of the things we have to do is try to stop a little bit trying to have us be understood, and instead for people to understand that we are a voting bloc. When we can be a voting bloc, then we'll have some power.
Interesting. Neil, comments on this?
Yeah, I'm sitting here. Once again, I'm like taking notes again. This is a blast. So Janine, you had the advantage on this one because every one of us knows that the truism that just always holds steady and really was even more pronounced this year than before was that relationships matter. And it's how you build those relationships, especially now that we're having to insert our opinions and educate elected officials from afar, right? From this kind of environment here in these little boxes. We'd better have had some relationships in advance in order to be able to connect with them. One of the things we do at the Y, I don't know how much you're familiar with the organization, community-based nonprofit. We do a lot of feeding of children, families, seniors. We do an awful lot of feeding operations. We rely heavily on Department of Agriculture funds and other private dollars to provide kids meals, after school, weekends, summer meals. And one of the things we love to do is we'll send an invitation to a member of Congress saying, ma'am, would you please join us? We're inviting you for lunch. But actually, what we're inviting you to do is serve lunch to our kids. Would you come put on an apron and help serve our kids during the summer camp when kids are out of school, can't get a meal? The elected officials, they come running for those. They participate in them. The daggonest thing, they tend to bring a photographer with them when they come to these things. But they meet the parents, they meet the kids, they meet our staff, they meet our board members. And our board members are the ones, sort of to what Jan was talking about, our board members are the ones who write checks. The nonprofits don't write checks, but our board members do. And when an elected official leaves an event like that, they remember who we are, what we do, and we call them up afterwards saying we need help because this program is at risk if we can't find some way to retain our employees. They know it. They've got pictures. They remember the kids that they met there. That's the building of relationships that Janine was talking about, so that they know when you call them and you say, I need your help, they realize they want to help you. They want you to continue being productive. The other thing we all learned over and over again, all politics continue to be local, right? It's one of the oldest truisms, but it holds as true this year. I'd say this though too, there's blocking and tackling with advocacy. What are your talking points? What are the messages that you need to send up to Capitol Hill? A problem we've had in the past is I've got my messages, Sue's got her messages, Janine's got her messages. We've all got something different. And if you're a Hill staffer, how do I synthesize all this? I mean, here I've got all these folks tell me all these things, and then Jan calls and she's crabby with me. I can't figure out what it is that they want me to do, so I don't do anything. This year we got really good, and I'm going to thank a lot of folks on this call. We got really good at having the same set of talking points when we went up to Capitol Hill to talk about the relief for charities, the hashtag relief for charities. And as a result, there wasn't a member of Congress, a staffer up there who didn't know 1, 2, 3. And it was the same whether it was the Southeast or way out west where Jan is, or across the country where WISE and Girl Scouts are. We discovered that matters more than I think we had imagined in the past. So there's a lot of truisms and advocacy that really came to bear this year. But Janine, you nailed it. Relationships matter, and how you build those relationships and how you make sure that you're engaging and educating these elected officials.
Thanks, Neil. Sandra?
Sure, thanks. So like Sue and Neil, we spent a lot of time in Washington being very practical, lobbying, members of Congress, talking points, the whole 9 yards. And so my truism is going to come from a very practical perspective. And that is that I'd rather have one member of Congress truly love my issue that I'm working on than a majority of members who care about it. So let me give you an example. For 10 years or so, a tremendous group of nonprofits and philanthropists worked to change the law to allow everyone that makes a gift to charity to get a charitable deduction. Equality for all donors. 10 long years and thousands of meetings with eager congressional staff and less eager but polite members of Congress. And then along came Senator Lankford from Oklahoma. He loved our issue and he pushed his staff to love it too. And last March, in the bleakest of times, late one night, as it happens in a small, dark room hidden from the glare of the press, he bullied nicely the leaders of the Senate to get it done. And it happened. The truism that was true before and remains true is having a lot of members of Congress like you is not good enough. You need someone that will go to bat for you.
All right. Seeing some agreement there. Sue, thank you, Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of things. And the first is, and this picks up on something Janine said, both her South Star comment and the long game. And that is, you have got to keep your eye on the North Star. What I saw, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, is that, you know, panic can lead to a lot of confusion, especially when you're in a highly unprecedented circumstance. And it was back at the beginning of the pandemic, and even now it almost feels like we're in this alternate universe. Nevertheless, you've got to stick to the basics. And as Neil and Janine said, it's relationships. You know, it's also staying focused on mission, because I think that panic can lead to mission creep, and that just gets you in trouble. And now I'm going to sound like I'm teaching my class because I go over this for the whole class. But you know, you've got to keep to mission. You've got to define your priorities. And you've got to do this, you know, especially in these unprecedented times, with your own colleagues in your own organization, to be sure that you're really aligned across all the functions of your organization. Everybody's kind of rowing in the same direction, and that your work is helping move the organization forward, and that there's an understanding of how you're doing that, because you may very well need to tap your colleagues for different resources. You really need to identify your unique and valuable voice on issues and use that in every way you can to get a seat at the table, so to speak. You need to find your allies, and you need to define what you can do together. But equally as importantly, you need to be really truthful about what you can't do together, because not everybody's going to agree on everything, but get together on the things that you can agree upon. And you've got to adapt and refine. So Neil has alluded to this coalition we're in. We have been working with colleagues from other national nonprofits since, and I know the date exactly, Neil, March 16th at 7:30 in the morning. And I did a quick count on the back of an envelope, and I think we have met more than 200 times since March 16th. And it's because almost every day, especially in the height of COVID legislation, we might have been on the phone 2-3 times a day, trying to be sure that everybody was doing everything we could. And, you know, one of the biggest values of this ad hoc coalition, like really like all effective coalitions, is the support we provide for each other to, in fact, keep the focus, to pressure test our ideas, to leverage resources, because none of us can do it alone. We simply don't have the resources. To share intelligence. We all have different relationships, and we all have different intelligence we can bring to the table. And we build a sort of an environment of trust so that we know we're sharing with people who will keep the information where it needs to be kept. To amplify messages, and frankly, you know, help to keep each other sane, which is, our 7:30 group, we kind of joke is, I don't know if we're sane, but it's almost like our own, you know, psychoanalyst couch, because a lot of times we just have to share our misery. So that's number one. The second thing I just want to say is that, you know, communication is key. And that being said, you've really got to be willing to adapt your message. And when I was writing my notes for this, I thought of that quote from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. Well, I'd say the same applies. Life is moving really fast. And if you don't stop and make sure people are hearing what you're saying, they'll miss it and you will lose. So again, it's back to basics. Don't be beholden to a well-worn narrative if it doesn't seem to be working anymore. Times change, priorities change, things shift, people change. The members of Congress don't stay the same. You've got to evolve. You've got to know your audience, and you've got to meet your audience where they are and walk them to where you want them to be. So back to you, Cindy.
Lots and lots of good points there. And we've covered a lot of ground, particularly in that second question. I have a query for you before we move on to the third and some other questions that I'm seeing are coming in also. So out of this, and we think about the identity politics that we've discussed here, Jane's mentioned that relationships matter. Thinking about how those two concepts either work together or don't, right? That it's even more important right now, especially in a crisis or three, as we're having at the moment, that you actually can reach across aisles, that you can actually speak to people who are outside what might be a normal bubble. How do you all suggest that we move forward given that? Let's talk about at a high level, given that there, as much as I appreciate, Neil, your comment that everybody had the same priorities, I have a feeling Jan might still say no. So I want to hear from her on that. But there have to be, I mean, we have, you know, representation, yes, within the sector, but at a high level, how do you suggest we move forward and continue to improve on the system we've had, which has been spotty at best at times, as a collective voice, right? To whether it's federal or within your geography at state or whatever your level is. How do we do that to amplify and to improve upon these collaborations that you've built, et cetera? Is there something waiting to be made there on an infrastructure level? Or are you guys good with just coming together when you need to in crisis and then moving back into your own spaces? What do you think we should do with this to improve the system, if we have a system? I'm going to start with Jan, because I'm guessing she has some reactions to what she's been hearing. We can't hear you.
So now we're actually talking about COVID more than we are about the election, I think. And I think, so that's okay, Cindy, is that okay?
As long as we're talking about the nonprofit sector and how it's okay, what it needs to the people that make the decision, okay. I'm good.
Great. Okay. So you know what, this is a big natural disaster, but we have had other disasters, and in every disaster, everybody collaborates well. You know, so that's not something brand new. Okay, if you were in Hurricane Katrina, if you were in the earthquakes, you know, back nonprofits work together. And first of all, there's kind of a common demand: money. Okay, give everybody money, and everybody's stepping out. Museums are taking in kids overnight, you know, so there's a lot of stuff that I wouldn't say is mission creep. I would say it's mission expansion. But in any case, I think that if we look at it in the context of other natural disasters, a lot of things happen that then fade away. And I think that it's important, you know, that those good things happen. And one of the things, though, that happens, I think, is that because most disasters are local, right? They're in Florida or something like that, you know, they're in California, that a lot of times resources come in from the outside and then they leave. Okay, so I think what we're seeing here with the national disaster, if you will, the resources coming in are federal government, and they're likely to leave. Okay, after 2 years, if we don't do something about it. And in terms of relationships, most of the relationship talk has been here, sort of relationship with elected officials or people in government or other kind of influential policymakers. And I think sometimes when it's easy to step into that world so much that sometimes we think only about how to play an inside game. We have to play an outside game too. Sometimes we have to be the problem, not the nice person, right? Sometimes if we're asking something that's pretty uncontroversial, like more money for kids, okay? But if we're asking for something like a change in how police forces run in communities, that's not something that relationships are going to be enough about. You have to play both an inside game and an outside game. And I think we're educating kind of a young group of new nonprofit leaders that are more and more familiar with the idea of inside games, but they don't know how to get 50 pissed off mothers to a city council meeting. All right, it doesn't even occur to them to do that. So I just want us to think that relationships have to be not the only conduit. Sometimes we also have to be angry and yelling and damaging those relationships and telling people this is only going to be a good relationship if you come around.
All right, other comments on this? It's open to, the floor is open to all of you and thinking about how we move forward with this, given what we're talking about. Neil?
Yeah, one of the beauties that Sue was sort of talking about, this group that gets together, these 7:30 a.m. calls, and the 200, that sounds like a pretty good number, but I know it's even more because very often within this group, we discover there are a couple of issues that not everyone agrees is a priority, but the 10 of us do. So we have separate meetings and we carve out separate strategies and separate talking points around those issues. I'm really, really hoping that the relationships we built with each other and this advocacy is going to continue. long after this crisis is over. We talk about relationships matter. The coalitions that have been formed to address the crisis around COVID and this last election season, I think it's great. It gives me great hope. The House of Representatives is the most narrow margin between Democrats and Republicans in a long, long time. The Senate, last I saw, I think it's 50-50. That's about as close as you're going to get here. Organizations that have an opportunity to speak with members of Congress from both sides of the aisle are going to be really important in the next few years. My organization, we are just as blue as we are red, and just as red as we are blue. And we're in 2,700 Ys in 10,000 communities. And we are very reflective of our community. I think it's going to be urgent that we find ways within our own organizations to come up with what those priorities are and move forward on those, because we're going to need both sides of the aisle if we're going to get any kind of public policy done. We're going to get this reconciliation package done this year because it's 50+1 on the Senate side. But anything else we want to get done around some of these other urgent priorities, we're going to have to be bipartisan, and that's going to require organizations that amongst themselves can work in a bipartisan way. And for a lot of us, sometimes that's the toughest part.
I'm seeing Janine take notes. Do you want to speak?
Yeah, I appreciate what my colleagues, excuse me, were saying, but I want to build on the last part of what Jan said about sometimes you have to, there has to be some level of, I'm going to use this word, agitation. And I do believe that too. I think there's a place for organizing. There's a place for peaceful protests, nonviolent protests, and certainly huge place for movement building. I mean, that is how change happens often in our country. But I'm not just speaking to national players. I mean, I'm going to speak to local, regional, and national in our sector. And I've been in the sector for a long time. I think we're often more competitive than we want to admit. I think we compete for recognition. I think we compete for resources. I think we are territorial at times. And I think that we need to care more about what's happening in a crisis moment like this and figure out how to pull down those walls and come together. I even see some leaders holding back, taking a position, bringing voice, because they are worried they're going to step on somebody else's toes who maybe should be more vocal. This is the time. There is no other moment in America, much like this, where we should be coming together in the sector. And I think some of these barriers continue to hold us back.
All right, thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Cindy. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of comments. One that Jan noted when she was sharing her remarks around our tendency to kind of play an inside game. And we have this sort of set group of people or organizations with whom we build relationships. And it's within the nonprofit sector, we tend to, have our relationships, although to Janine's point, sometimes we're competing. And then it's our lawmakers. And depending on what arena you're working in, it may be your local, your state, or your federal. I think that this goes back to a comment I made at the very beginning around really understanding and better expressing and better being part of the ecosystem within which we operate, and understanding who else is there who may have shared priorities, shared interest in making sure that our communities thrive. And so I don't think we do a particularly good job, especially at the national level, figuring out where we might have intersection with for-profit, with corporate social responsibility programs, which we know that, and this is a topic for another workshop, but this sort of blurring of the lines, and is the nonprofit sector what it used to be, or there's all kinds things to be said about benefit corps and all that. But at any rate, I don't know that we've really struck into that thread, which could give us a lot more amplification. So that, I think, is an area for us to further explore. And then one additional comment, I'm picking up on what Janine has spoken about both earlier and in her most recent comments. You know, I think there is a tremendous role for the nonprofit sector to play in fostering civil discourse and trying to get us back to a space of civil discourse. And whether it's in programs like Neil and I participate in, which are youth focused, or whether it's more community-wide, we really need to grasp hold of the responsibility we have to provide a space for people to figure out how to constructively share ideas and get used to being civil again. Because, you know, if we don't do it, who is going to do it? So I throw that out there for consideration.
So Sandra, I'm going to let you have any comments that you'd like to on this, and then I have another question to pose you.
Just one comment, and that is that to pick up on civil discourse, we need to get the lazy thinkers off the sidelines and into civil discourse, because civil discourse between and among Republicans and Democrats is critical, because, as Neil pointed out, anything that's going to happen in the next couple of years is going to be done with the moderates. It's going to be done in the middle. And civil discourse is going to be critical to be able to arrive at positions that are in the middle. And they're going to need to convince each other and therefore the organizations that they're working with and the constituents they're working with about the merit and the merits of the other side in order to be able to collaborate and get to the middle. So that's all I wanted to say. Everybody.
That is a great segue into my next question. And this may be more directed to some of you than others. So feel free, not everybody has to answer this if it's not as much in your bailiwick. So given what we've been talking about here, and especially the point you just made about meeting in the middle, for those of you that are working on a national stage, and you've got your priorities, you've got your messaging, you've got your relationships, what do you do when you're working across states that, as we've seen now, are more red and more blue than ever? We are divided. That has been coming for some time. This election put a point on it, if you will. And so what do you do about your messaging when you've got states that feel very differently, that may be, you know, right near each other or within your geography that you have to deal with? What kind of consistency can you keep? And how do you think about translating that to people who have very, very different starting points politically on doing advocacy in our sector? Neil?
Well, it's part of our DNA. We don't work on any bills that are not bipartisan. Everything we write, everything we sign on to, we make sure that it is something that our wives in Nebraska and Kansas would be just as pleased to sign on to as our wives in Chicago, Boston, and New York would want to sign into. It's part of how we work, and it's served us well. I wouldn't want to change any of it. You know, I just couldn't agree with Sandra more on this. If we're going to get anything done, we want to get anything constructive done, we're going to have to work the middle. You know, we're talking about this reconciliation package, and that's what, for all of us here, we've been working on that the last how many weeks straight on this one. We tip anything too far to the left on this bill, Joe Manchin walks. Some of these moderate Democratic senators could walk, and then the whole thing caves in and we get nothing. We have to learn how to live in the middle, how to listen to folks on both sides of the aisle, and then identify what those things are that we do have in common, and focus on those and move forward on those, and create a little bit of muscle memory. Once we're able to work together on some really good things that benefit our families, our kids, our communities. It's going to be easier the next time.
Sue, I figure you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so, you know, I would say communication, again, going back to communication is key, and message discipline is key. And as I said earlier, you've got to know your audience. And we talk about this ad nauseum in the class I teach. But, you know, deconstruct what it is you're trying to achieve. What is the problem you're trying to solve for? And then how do you explain that problem and explain the solution and explain the benefits of solving for that problem to your audience? And if they are on the right or the left, it may look a little different. It may be an economic argument. It may be a social justice argument, but figure out what your audience is going to respond to that gets them to the resolution you need. And so I just think that sometimes, again, this gets to, we get beholden to a single message and think it's the only way to explain our issues, but you have to understand where your audience is coming from so that you can walk them to the solution you're trying to get them toward, and really think creatively about what problem you're trying to solve and what are the positive ramifications of fixing for that, and what is the negative. And how do you define those in terms that resonate with your audience? If you're talking to somebody more conservative, it's going to be a different, perhaps a different framing than if you're talking to someone more liberal, but you're getting to the same place. And that is not being disingenuous, it is not being dishonest, it is trying to appeal to what moves that person. And oftentimes there are kind of two sides to the resolution of every issue. So
thank you for that. Comments further there on how you reach those who are still perhaps in a bubble?
Yeah, I'll just jump in because I really appreciated what my colleagues were saying about how to address this. And I really like, Sue, what you said about answering the question, what problem are we trying to solve? You know, one of my colleagues in Atlanta, Dr. David Dodson, has often said, you've got reality truthfully and take action responsibly. And one of the things that he does is try to bring common ground around the issues that people care about through data and information, and to start with the data that helps to uncover what the issues are that people care about, regardless of ideology or perspective. And in our communities across the South, people care about children, youth, families, and communities, and want to see them improve their quality of life. So what's the data? How can we get there? And we have a very diverse membership. And, you know, we've maintained a very high retention rate, even though people have very different perspectives and viewpoints and ideologies, because we try to meet people around some common ground. So I would say you've got to meet people where they are and figure out, what do they care about? What problem do they want to solve?
So that's related to a couple of questions that I'm seeing that are coming in that are interrelated also. And it harkens back to one of the points earlier. We had slightly different views on this about trying to help policymakers, whether at the state or the federal level, really understand what role the sector plays and its fundamental importance to communities, et cetera. I know, Jan, you had a comment about, you know, that understanding may or may not ever happen. And so we really have to think about what moves the lever, right? What's going to show someone, is it power through money? Is it power through voting, et cetera? But if we are thinking about any kind of understanding, is it through data? Is it through economic data? What do you think has still been missing? Because again, if we can't make this case right now, I'm really not sure when we're going to be able to make it, folks. And it's no longer early in the pandemic. It's no longer early for racial equity issues. This is our second recession within the span of 15 years. So these, we are seeing them in different ways. It's been exacerbated by different factors. Certainly it's an extreme situation to have the confluence of these events, but there's nothing at its heart that's actually brand new here. So what are we going to do differently in the future to try to make our case, however that is? Jan, start with you, if I could.
Well, we've sort of been talking as if the nonprofit sector, I mean, it's just, I guess, I'm not willing to really think that there's all that much, that there's big divisions in the nonprofit sector. There's the big division between philanthropy and active nonprofits. There's a big division between infrastructure organizations and direct services. I think that there's a big difference between nonprofits, regardless of the field, in wealthy communities compared to the same work in poor communities. So I think, what I think is that sort of what we have, what I think is new is in the last 20 years, is we now have kind of a pretty big infrastructure swath of people like those of us on this call, right? We know about nonprofits. We know not just about we know about nonprofits. We're engaged in public policy issues. We're kind of the liberal policy intelligentsia, okay? And I think that this group of people is maybe the wrong ones, okay, to be in the leadership of this idea, because I think that we want, I think a couple, like, for example, one of the things I've been very interested in seeing what's happened to small business. Now, 40 years ago, small business was completely dissed. Like, who cares about a hardware store owner? They're just all zero. And now everybody has this idea, small business creates jobs. Okay, everybody has learned that mantra. And I think, I think that it needs to be not so much, I guess to me, I think about not raising awareness so much about, because raising awareness about the nonprofit community tends to mean raising awareness about the big national mainstream organizations. And instead, I think or about philanthropy. And I guess I would rather see us make the focus on communities but the policies that we bring forward are ones that bring money into those communities, as opposed to saying we need people to understand nonprofits so they'll give us money. We need people to understand communities and respect the voting power of communities. So when we go for them with something, they have a reason to give it.
Okay.
One last thing about this, I just think in the ecosystem of policy, you want some people that never do anything that's not bipartisan. I get that. That's a great strategy for the Y. It may not be a good strategy for the movement for Black lives. Okay, and so I think we have to say some demands, some needs, some urgencies do not fit into that context.
Well, it is so true that whenever you're meeting in the middle, which is a strategy, you're definitely having to meet, by definition, the common denominator.
You have to be like, you need the ranting crazy people like me. Look, we're not like her,
Well, and that is true. One thing I think that's tough is that at the same time, our sector is trying to say, how do we elevate as a voice? We also are trying to in all these policy meetings, we talk about what a vast sector and completely disparate group of organizations we are, and yet we call it a sector, right? And nobody quite knows how to define us. So we're trying to have it both ways. We want to be a voice when we need to be, and we want to be distinguished when we need to be, right?
So do farmers.
Yeah, every group can, yes, absolutely. Other thoughts on this and how we think about elevating and making our case, if you will, Sue?
Yeah, so when I raised this earlier in this workshop, my thinking around this is that I'm not sure those who are making policies, those who are trying to create relief solutions for the nonprofit sector actually understand the role it plays. So put aside whether it's large nonprofits or small nonprofits or anything around that. It's what is its role in the fabric of our communities and what happens if it's not there? And so therefore, why do we need to support it? So I reflect, Jan, you're right. Many, many years ago, small business, why would anybody care? Now, for heaven's sake, we absolutely cannot give up on our small businesses. And I think back to early in the pandemic when we saw solutions being crafted for the airline industry, solutions being crafted for the tourism industry, for restaurants. Why? Because lawmakers understand that if people don't travel, then people don't go to hotels, and then they don't go to restaurants, and they don't go to and they don't do all of these things. There's this domino effect that happens. Same thing with restaurants. If the restaurants close, obviously the people who work there are out of work. The food, this food supply chain stops. All of these other things happen. There's a domino effect. And I don't know that people understand the domino effect of what happens if nonprofits cannot operate fully and in support of communities. And so to your question, Cindy, that I know was coming through the Q&A, do we need more data or different data? Or I don't know. I think we just need to connect the dots better than we have in the past. Because I actually think we have a lot of information. And if we don't have hard data about the whole sector, we certainly can create anecdotes in any member of Congress's district, in any mayor's city, in any place. So that's what I think we need to do, is tell the story better with the information we have.
Neil, I saw your hand.
Sandra said something earlier, and it really resonated, and I wanted to go back like 3 or 4 times and bring it up. She said, you need a champion. And it's something we really had a hard time with this year. And Sandra, you were right to talk about Senator Lankford. Holy cow, he stepped up. What a tremendous champion. And for a lot of folks on one side of the political spectrum to find ourselves suddenly cheering Senator Lankford as a great champion made a few folks, I don't know, mildly uncomfortable, probably because he would be opposed to some of the other issues that are important. But on this issue, on charitable giving and incentivizing charitable giving, there was nobody who was more tenacious, more eloquent, more engaged. He was fighting for us at every turn. We have to find our champions, and you never know where they're going to be. It might be someone who I used to, at one point in my career, I spent a lot of time, I worked for the American Red Cross. And you find someone who, a member of their family was saved because of a blood donation. Or a member of their family was affected by disaster, and the Red Cross provided a helping hand. I see it all the time with the YMCA. We have graduates of some of our youth and government programs who are now working on Capitol Hill, who are members of Congress on Capitol Hill. I don't have to explain to them who we are, what we do, and what our role is around youth development. They're walking billboards for it themselves. Find champions, cultivate those champions. If you're lucky, they're in the majority party. If you're really lucky, someone might call them Madam Chairman. Do the very best you can to cultivate vocal, aggressive, compassionate champions.
Sandra, do you have any other comment at this point with the discussion before I move on to our last question of the evening?
I'm reminded of the phrase, it's all been said, but not everyone has said it. So I'm gonna stand down.
All right. So last question for the evening, and there are so many that we could ask here. There are so many follow-up questions here about the how we accomplish some of the issues that you've raised here. We've raised issues and we've talked about what's important, what's new, what has remained true that has not been new. How we move forward on this is really the biggest question. And some of the questions coming in tonight are just that. It's really the beyond even strategy, but really tactically, how do we actually think about moving forward? And I know each of you is addressing that in your own organizations and in some of the collaborative efforts that you're doing as well. I'm interested in knowing whether through your own organization in the position that you hold, or just through the many years of experience that you have and the big picture perspective, which is why you're all on here tonight. What is the thing that you most believe that our sector should be paying attention to, whether in policy or in advocacy, which is really, again, separate issue and a different manner of thinking? What is the thing that we should be thinking about? And then in fact, if we don't, we ignore at our peril. I'm going to start with Janine again.
Thank you for that question. I was reflecting on something that I heard a speaker say this week that we had invited to speak to our members, because my answer is going to be equity, and specifically racial equity, I believe, is the key to achieving any sort of progress as a nation, and certainly within the Southeastern region. And what this speaker said was, just to make the distinction, equality is when everybody gets a pair of shoes, and equity is when everybody gets a pair of shoes that fit. And so, you know, my thinking about this is that, you know, racial inequities are undergirding so many of the challenges that we're facing. And whether we talk about education, housing, economic mobility, we could make a moral case or an ethical case for equity, but I think it's also important for us to make a business and an economic case for equity. And we see the changes within our region. And I think for all of us, we know that the diversity of our communities in the South and across the country are expected to become majority minority by the year somewhere around 2050. So if these existing disparities continue, particularly, let's just take education as one example, if those disparities continue, and unfortunately in the South, we often fall very low on indicators of various issues, including education, health, poverty, income, et cetera. If we can't fix this, we're gonna have a workforce that we can't fill with the types of jobs that will be needed. I think we're already facing that challenge. And I also think that if foundations ignore the effect of systemic inequities, then they're going to risk losing their own relevancy and will likely fail to achieve the desired impact that they have. So for us at the Southeastern Council, we've been spending the past few years, you know, talking with our board, talking with our members, calling for leadership in this space, demonstrating leadership in this space. And it's become the #1 thing in our member survey. 63% of our members have indicated that they want more information, that they want more learning, that they're growing in this area, not just talking to their boards, but really bringing sustainable kinds of impact to this space. And so I really think that it's something that we've spent time asking our board, what do we stand for as an organization? What are we willing to fight for? And are we going to sit idly by while these disparities exist, while these indicators are so low in the South, and continue to just focus on best and next practice in philanthropy? The answer to that for us is no. And so equity has become a key part of our work. It's not something, as Dr. King would say, that we want to thingify. We're not just going to put a program on it or a program at our annual meeting. It's an inside out strategy. It's something that will be a part of everything that we do. And our board just approved an equity committee, which is an approved permanent committee of our board. So this will be long lasting after I leave as president and after my board members transition.
Institutionalizing it important. And in fact, a major issue right now is really whether or not best practices are ethical practices, right? And whether they're equitable practices. We tend to teach best practices because it's what people have been doing and work, they think. But with these new lenses and really thinking harder about this, that's really called into question whether best practice is actually in fact best. Jan, you're next.
Yeah.
Comments on this?
I remember talking to some people who were from a disabilities organization recently, and one of the things they said is that they had become so much aware how many of their families have undocumented members in the family. And, you know, even though that they're a disabilities organization, not a equity organization, not an immigration organization, you know, nonetheless, they felt like that they had to take up some issues around immigration. And I think that they came to that thinking, not because they saw data about how many people are disabled or in undocumented families, but I think that because we come to these kinds of new things, instead of asking sort of, we tend to ask is, what are our goals, right? We've been trained in strategic planning. What are our goals? What do we want to do? And I would like us to ask instead, who is our community and what do they need us to do? Instead of what do we want to do or what should we do? Who is our community and what do they need us to do? Not so much what they need us to hear us say and write pronouncements about, but what do they need to see us actually do? If we do that, I think we'll get to equity. I think we'll get to a lot of things in a different way that kind of opens people's minds to outside of our staff and boards.
So really giving voice to that intersectionality that exists right in our communities, and people think of themselves in a lot of different ways and represent lots of different needs within our community simultaneously. And the more we talk about it, the more we're going to see it and hear it, and should give voice to it. Neil, thoughts on this in terms of moving forward?
Yeah, I like the way you framed it too. What specific information our organization is going to be focused on? I think it's right in front of our face, right? The effects of this past year on our kids, our families, our seniors, our communities. The learning loss for some of our kids is profound. The kids who are not able to participate in virtual online classes, the development of some of our younger kids who are not able to be in classes, and they're not in homes that are safe, child abuse. There are so many effects of this last year. We're going to need to roll up our sleeves and start to address as soon as we can. Our seniors who are just so disconnected right now and unable to spend time with each other as much as with their family. We're all looking at and reading the studies, what's going on with mental health, what's going on with physical health. What is it that we're going to be focused on in the coming year? We're going to be focused on trying to recover and help folks to thrive again, to bring our community back together again, to help our kids. And I think it's going to be a full-time job for a lot of nonprofits the next couple of years.
Thank you for that, Sandra.
So I knew I was going to be towards the end. So I was grappling with how I could be different. And I just want to raise up one issue that we've heard a lot as consumers, which is the privacy issue. Right, over the past couple of years, we've heard a lot about our own privacy with data, our own privacy with health records. And I think we're going to start hearing a lot more about privacy in the nonprofit sector. The Supreme Court's going to take up a donor privacy case this year, and they're going to try to thread the needle between how much transparency and disclosure is appropriate and how much of it is not appropriate. So I think that's something we're going to be talking about for a while.
Yeah, fascinating issues around transparency, privacy, speech, money and speech,
all of that.
Speech, it's all interrelated and very much a state and federal issue. One of the beautiful moments around First Amendment is that it exists at both levels with concurrent jurisdiction. So that's interesting. Sue, you're batting cleanup.
Yeah, so like Sandra, I want to think of something that has not yet been touched upon. So what do we ignore at our peril? Well, the fact is that 2020 was an extremely difficult year for many nonprofits, and 2021 is going to be more difficult in a lot of ways. And so for many nonprofits, it's really about doubling down on the basics and what you do well, and how to leverage your role in your community in the most effective way possible. to do the most you can in what's going to be another challenging year. Agree with Neil on a number of the issues. My organization, Girl Scouts of the USA, will be focusing on some of the same: learning loss, mental health, things like that. But one area where we are really leaning in is civic education. It's an issue that is sort of having its moment. Coming out of this election cycle, we know, as we said early on, young people super energetic about being engaged, and there's a big civic education bill called the Educating for Democracy Act that should be reintroduced relatively soon here. So that's one example of where we'll be focusing a lot of attention, and it aligns directly with our mission and with our programs. And so, so we're excited to see where that goes.
That's great. So lots and lots of issues here for moving forward. Again, we could have another whole couple of panels on the how that we think about doing this. So I want to thank all of you so much. There are so many other things we could discuss, and I love speaking with each of you. It is a real honor for us at our program to be able to host all of you tonight with all of the expertise that you share. So thank you for that, and I will reconnect with all of you soon. And thank you to our audience for joining us this evening. It's been an hour and a half of amazing discussion. We invite you to join us to many of the other events that we have. You can go to our website and see all sorts of things that are available, especially right now. Everything's virtual, so we invite you to that. I want to give a special shout out to Sue and Sandra for the entire workshop series that we've had here. We do invite everybody to go look at the 6 different sessions. Sue and Sandra, thank you for all your hard work, and to all of you again for your generosity of time and expertise. And thank you to the staff for making this series possible. Here we are at the start of yet another cycle, state and federal, midterms still to come, not too long. So it is upon us again. With that, I want to thank all of you. Have a safe and healthy evening, and best of all this year. Good night.